This is Charles. Charles is an admiral of France. He commands 14 warships, some 3,000 soldiers, the personal confidence of the Emperor Napoleon III, and the most advanced naval artillery in Asian waters. It is September of 1858, and Charles has arrived in Vietnam to conduct what everyone in Paris agrees will be a brief, glorious, and above all, profitable intervention. Charles is going to spend the next year and a half trapped on a beach, losing an argument with the drinking water.
Yes.
I'm aware that sentence requires some elaboration. The campaign he is about to conduct will feature remarkably few battles. His enemy will decline politely and repeatedly to have one. And the great Franco-Spanish expedition to Indochina will be defeated, comprehensively, by an opponent its officers never saw, never named in a single dispatch, and could not have hit with a cannon if they had tried. Dysentery. Well, dysentery and its associates. Now, the official reason for the expedition was the protection of missionaries. The Emperor of Vietnam, Tu Duc, had been executing Catholic priests, which was true and dreadful, and also, for the governments of France and Spain, extraordinarily convenient. France wanted a foothold in Asia. Spain, whose own bishop had been among the executed, contributed over 1,000 soldiers from Manila. Protecting the faith, it turned out, required an invasion fleet, a shopping list of ports, and a timetable. The fleet arrived at Tourane, present-day Da Nang, at the very end of August 1858. The bombardment began the following morning, and it went exactly as everyone in Paris had promised it would. The shore batteries were silenced, the Dien Hai citadel fell, the town was taken. Total elapsed time, roughly 2 days. Charles wrote his first dispatches in the tone of a man running slightly ahead of schedule. In Paris, the matter was considered settled. The newspapers announced a triumph. The ministries updated their maps in pencil, optimistically, and discussed which gentlemen might be sent out to govern the new possession. Somewhere in an office overlooking the Seine, it is reasonable to assume a clerk began designing the administrative stationery. The campaign had lasted 2 days, and the paperwork of victory was already, in the French manner, well ahead of the victory itself. And then the plan, which had performed beautifully for 48 hours, arrived at its next line item, which read, in effect, the Vietnamese now surrender. They did not. Instead, the court at Hue sent a general named Nguyen Tri Phuong. And it must be said immediately that Phuong understood this war better than any other man in it. He inspected the most heavily armed fleet ever to anchor in Vietnamese waters, and he made a decision of genuinely irritating brilliance. He declined to fight it. His army dug. A ring of trenches and earthworks rose around the French position, patient and unhurried, like a tide coming in. The population of the surrounding countryside was moved out. The rice went with them. The livestock went with them. The wells, one way or another, stopped being reliable. For a hungry army, the entire province simply ceased to exist. Charles did what a fleet is built to do. He attacked. That spring, French columns assaulted the earthworks, and took them because the earthworks were held by men with spears and matchlocks, facing men with rifled cannon. And having taken them, they discovered the essential feature of General Phuong's system. Behind the captured trench, there was another trench. Phuong's men had withdrawn a polite distance and dug. The French could capture any line they liked, at a price, in that heat. There was always another line. Some victories are a form of losing slowly, and these were among them. Charles now held a port, a citadel, and a beach. Nothing attacked him, nothing needed to, because it was the tropics, and the tropics kept a schedule of their own. First the heat, then the monsoon, which turned the trenches into soup, and then the diseases, arriving in procession like guests at a levee: dysentery, scurvy, malaria, and finally, in the summer, cholera. It's worth pausing on who was actually in those trenches. Conscripts and Marines who had survived a 5-month voyage around the world. Soldiers from Manila fighting for an empire that barely recorded their names. Young men who had been promised a short war and a share of glory, and who instead lay in hospital tents listening to the rain. In the first 3 weeks of June 1859, the garrison buried 200 of them. One battalion, freshly landed in April, lost a third of its strength in 2 months. Most of them never saw a battle at all. The military situation, meanwhile, remained officially excellent. A word, in fairness, about the Spanish. Spain had entered this war over its executed bishop, and its soldiers from Manila fought and died in the same trenches, of the same diseases, with rather less say in the matter. Their commander, Colonel Palanca, wrote his own increasingly weary reports to Madrid, which received them with the special attention governments reserve for allies who cannot leave. Spain would emerge from the entire enterprise with approximately nothing. Its reward in the eventual treaty was the right to be mentioned in it. Charles responded the way capable men respond to impossible assignments, with memoranda. His dispatches home curdled, month by month, from confidence to concern, to something the naval archives politely catalogue as frankness. He informed Paris that the entire enterprise had been founded on, and I am paraphrasing only slightly, enthusiastic nonsense supplied by people who had never been to Vietnam. Paris received these reports with great interest and sent more instructions. In February of 1859, he took most of the fleet south and captured Saigon instead, which at least possessed rice, a river, and a reason to be there. Saigon, it should be said, promptly developed the same condition. The garrison Charles left behind was besieged in its turn by another Vietnamese army behind another ring of earthworks, and would spend the better part of a year holding a perimeter it could not enlarge. The empire now possessed 2 beaches at opposite ends of the country, each surrounded by patient men with shovels. In Paris, this was reported as momentum. Then he sailed back to Tourane, where the trenches had, in his absence, declined to disappear. The garrison dug in for a second tropical summer. Yes, that's what they did. By the autumn, Charles had had enough. He resigned his command and sailed home. His successor inherited the beach, the trenches, the hospital tents, and the arithmetic was not improving. In March of 1860, after 18 months, the expedition boarded its ships, weighed anchor, and left. General Phiong's army watched them go from the earthworks. The total territorial gain of the great Franco-Spanish expedition at Tourane stood at this, the ground its dead were buried in. Which brings us inevitably to the question of what exactly Phiong had done. Because from inside the citadel it looked like nothing. It was not nothing. Phiong had identified the one thing the expedition could not resupply: time. Warships can be recalled. Soldiers at a price can be replaced. But an empire's patience is a budget, and budgets run out. So he arranged for Vietnam to cost more than Paris was prepared to pay, and then he waited for Paris to notice. The heat and the cholera were not his allies by luck. He had chosen a battlefield on which they would do the fighting for him. The French won every engagement they were offered, and it purchased them precisely nothing. The Armada was never outfought. It was outweighted. As for General Phiong, he did not consider the matter finished. He fought the French for another 15 years, at Saigon, where he was wounded, and at last at Hanoi in 1873, an old man on a wall, defending a citadel with weapons 2 centuries out of date. Wounded and captured, he refused French surgeons, and then he refused food, and he died as he had fought, on his own schedule, on his own terms. The French, who had never managed to beat him quickly, recorded his death with something close to respect. We do still do this, incidentally. Every few years, a supremely confident organization arrives somewhere with superior technology, a detailed plan, and no curiosity whatsoever about the local terrain. And the terrain, unconsulted, votes. We call it disruption on the way in and a learning experience on the way out. The equipment is always excellent. The map is always wrong. Charles, for what it's worth, was fine. He went home, was decorated, and finished his career as France's Minister of the Navy. The men from the hospital tents were less fortunate. The expedition kept, in the end, exactly 1 piece of Vietnamese ground, and holds it still. It is a cemetery. It is still there,